Hello everyone, it's Professor Richard Amadeus Harris III again. In this video, I'm going to explain one way to write a research paper. This is the method I use to actually write papers. Now, I will say this, I do not write papers from beginning to end, meaning page one, that's where I start to write, and whatever's in the middle remains in the middle. Whatever I write at the end remains at the end. I actually begin to jump right smack in the middle of the paper, and this is how I do it. So let's say that our research question is, what are the views of first generation Asian migrants towards the federal government in the media? All right, so that's my research question. Previously, I explained how I found, or at least how I find, peer-reviewed journal articles. So let's say that I decided to use 4 sources for this research paper. These simple sentences right here are a way to describe the entire article in one sentence, all right, one succinct sentence. So the first thing I do is I start to write the literature review. So what the literature review does is it reviews the literature. These sources over here, this is the literature, the peer-reviewed sources. These are the articles or the research that has been done before the research that I'm conducting right now. So what I do is I look at the sources and I decide to put them in order. Either put them in order by theme or by the sources. You may notice that when you start to look at your sources, for the most part, they attempt to answer one specific question. So in this sense, I'm going to look at my 4 sources and decide how do I want to present the material in a cogent and important manner. So in this case, our first source describes some demographics of Asian migrants. My second source explains the use of television used by Asian Americans. The third source describes immigration patterns of Asian migrants. And the fourth source is the usage of social media by age. So looking at it, I think one good way to present the material would be perhaps source 1 first, then source 2, then source 4. Now consider this. If you have all your sources, which you should by now, either present the material by theme or by sources. So in this case, I'm going to start to present them by sources because I will assume that these sources all focus on just their one specific theme. So what I would do is I start to summarize source 1, source 3, source 2, and source 4. And each of these sources should be about 2 to 3 paragraphs. After that, I'd add a transition. And what I mean transition, what I mean is instead of just having the article and the description of what the article is saying, meaning I add a few transition sentences right at the end of the last second or third paragraph, which will lead into the next article. In doing so, I'd have my literature review. Alrighty, there I go. The next step I would take is to move on to the discussion section, which is also known as the theory. So you may recall when we discuss research methods, that research goes hand in hand with data and theory. The literature review, this is the data, information, data, data, data. The discussion, the theory, is how are we going to look at and analyze the data. First, I'm going to move this over. Go. So how do we want to look at the data? We can either look at it from the functional perspective, from the conflict theory, symbolic interactionist, feminist theory, strain theory, etc. It's up to you. You can analyze the data however you wish. Just as well, make sure that you look at all of your data and analyze it from one perspective. As I mentioned before, data is nothing. It means nothing until we add the meaning to it, which is the discussion section. After that, I'll start to write the introduction. Then after I write the introduction, I'd write the conclusion. Now you're probably wondering, why am I writing the introduction now and then immediately following, why am I writing the conclusion? If you think about a lot of papers, especially research papers, the introduction sets up the entire paper. There's no way I could start to write the introduction before the literature review or the discussion because I don't know what I've written already. So the introduction will read something along the lines of, this paper discusses the demographics of Asian migrants, immigration patterns of Asian migrants, how much they watch television, and the use of social media using the, we'll say, functional perspective. There we go. Now I can write the introduction because I have the literature review and I also have the discussion. The conclusion concludes the paper by restating what was in the paper. And that's why I write the introduction and the conclusion at about the same time, because they read almost identical. After that, then I write the abstract. The abstract is very similar to the introduction and the conclusion. And if you think about the peer-reviewed articles that you found beforehand, you may notice that the abstract summarizes the entire paper. So it should be between 100 to 200 words. That is it. Nice, short, and concise. After the conclusion, works cited. So that's how I write a paper, for the most part. Now notice I still have the research question up here. What I also do is I look through the paper, look through the literature review, look through the discussion, and then I look at my research question. If I have material in my literature review that has nothing to do with my research question, I take it out. Just get right to it and attempt to answer the research question the best you can. Then I work on the title. Another thing is, as far as the literature review, I take out these sources, remove the source names and so forth. Just keep in mind that we want the paper to be as smooth as possible. Read as smooth and coherent as possible. Once you're done, look over your paper. Make sure you have the title at the very top. Next is the abstract. Next is the introduction, the literature review, the discussion section, the conclusion, and lastly, the works cited. And that's how I write my papers. Hopefully, many of you find this helpful if you don't have a method in which you write your own paper. If you do have another method that works well for you, then by all means, continue to use it. Another key point to keep in mind is that this is research. It is not an essay. It's research, meaning keep all personal viewpoints out of the paper. Remember to write in third person. Avoid language such as, I did this. This is my research question. Keep that out. Just focus on the data and keep it as objective as possible. All right? So you got this. Good luck.